Mr. Putin came to the SCO summit with a huge contingent of cabinet ministers and leaders of Russian business. And one of them was the head of Gazprom, and he was boasting about a new gas pipeline that is going to supply China with endless amounts of gas for eternity. And indeed, Mr. Putin reiterated this during his post-parade press conference. However, it seems that the Chinese foreign ministry politely pushed back on that, saying there's no agreement. So that's interesting. You know, Xi Jinping is a very, very smart guy. We may not believe with his politics or his oppression, but he does know that for China to continue its growth, it needs a lot of energy resources. That is why his gaze is also looking over there to the Russian Far East, which is very, very lightly protected now because of the war in Ukraine, but where there are massive, massive resources.
Hello, welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And today we are talking to a Ukraine-based global affairs analyst with more than 2 decades experience in humanitarian work and international journalism. Michael Bociurkiw is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and has been a spokesman for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He's also an author and a regular commentator here on Frontline. Michael, great to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me again, Kate.
Yeah, and Michael, you're talking to us from Odessa, and just before we started this conversation, you said the alerts had gone off that there was going to be an attack on Odessa, and there was one overnight. And all of this comes in the week that we saw images of President Putin attending President Xi's biggest ever military parade in Beijing to mark the end of the Second World War. I mean, brazenly, he just doesn't care what's happening in Ukraine. He's going to continue. And any talk of peace is basically fictitious, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. And Putin, in the aftermath of that big circus in China, the SCO summit and the big parade in Beijing, said that if Ukraine can't achieve peace at the peace table, Russia will do whatever it can by military means to settle this thing. And yes, indeed, air raid sirens have gone off, as they often do here. Apparently drones approaching, and overnight critical infrastructure was hit here in Odessa. But the big one in the past 48 hours was nationwide all over Ukraine, something like, I believe, 500 drones. It's really, Kate, Kiev that is being massively hit, and it's not as if it's happening every night, but enough to certainly weaken the confidence of investors, to scare people away. I mean, I no longer go to Kiev for security reasons. It's just too unsafe and too unpredictable. And what we discussed the other day here was the hits, whether it's by fast missile or by drones, are so unpredictable that indeed no inch of Ukraine can be considered safe. I'll give you a quick example. The other day I was sitting out with a group of journalists here in Odessa, and the air raid alarms had stopped. And second later, there was a massive, massive explosion. It was far away, but it was a big, powerful one. So it goes to show you how things go here. But as you and I have spoken many times, Kate, I mean, life does go on. People are going about their business. They've been enjoying summer absolutely to the max here on the Odessa beaches. It's good to see, but again, it's, one worries about the long-term consequences. I am very, very sure that part of the Putin calculus, which you asked about, was to chase people or scare people out of Ukraine, to change the demographics here. And indeed, millions of people have left. Whether they will return, it remains to be seen.
And also, how much do you think of Putin's calculus is based on the fact that he thinks if he can keep stalling on any talk about meetings whatsoever by inviting Zelensky to Moscow, which is fanciful, isn't it? Let's face it, because he's never going to do that. If he can keep stalling, then actually he can keep taking as much ground as he can, throwing people into the meat grinder, as it were, in order to do that, based on perhaps a gamble that President Trump will one day say or try and force some kind of deal in which the land that they do take, he tries to force Ukraine to cede to Russia.
Yeah, in that post parade press conference, Putin not only said if Zelensky wants to meet with him, he can come to Moscow, but he also, I don't know where he's getting his briefings from, but maybe this is the way it works with autocrats. He actually said that a lot of the units on the Ukrainian front line are staffed at maybe 40%. That's the first time I've heard that, and certainly contradicts the reports that we all get from the front line. So I think it's a mix of bravado, of his belief that he can push as hard as he can with pretty much abandon and nothing will happen. The consequences are very low. And yeah, this is exactly the Russian strategy, is to string things out as long as possible. And he realizes a couple of things, is that the attention span of Mr. Trump and the attention span of many Western leaders tends to shift over time. They have other competing priorities at home. Look at the mess your UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is right now with NHS and taxes and migrants and a whole bunch of things there. And also, there was a lot of strong headlines made of the other day when the EU chiefs, Ursula von der Leyen's plane flew right into Russian GPS blocking in Bulgaria. And what I noticed from that one is basically we received a whimper from the EU, from NATO, and the Russians see this. They're not afraid of these statements. Words don't mean anything to them, so that almost gives them a green light to press ahead.
To talk a little bit more about what happened in China this week, how much further do you think President Xi's new global and economic order came after that summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Has it reached a new crossroads, as he says?
Well, I think it's important to separate fact from spectacle. A lot of that was indeed spectacle. Reminds me of the circus in Alaska between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. We saw an interesting coalition there of Xi Jinping playing host to Vladimir Putin, to the North Korean leader. India's Modi was not there, but he was at the SCO summit. The leader of Pakistan was there, which was interesting. Malaysia, a whole bunch of others. But, we saw a parade and we saw lots of shiny new equipment. But the analysts I've talked to, the analysts I read, all say their unanimity about this is that, that was exactly what it was. This was a parade. We know that this is an untested army. The last time the Chinese got into real war was in the late 1970s with a dust-up with Vietnam. So they're very, very much untested. And the other thing is here, we saw the addition of new units to the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, Cyber Command, Space Command. But I think we're also looking at this and realizing at the same time that, as with the army in Russia, is that it's a very top-down structure, which aren't very agile in the real theater of war, and also that these units aren't necessarily well integrated. But I think this was also the SCO summit and the gathering of the bad neighbors, if you will, in Beijing, were lifting a collective middle finger to Donald Trump and saying, see, we have the power, we're united. There was a lot of criticism, not necessarily by name, but of Mr. Trump for swinging carelessly his tariff baton, especially towards India. Excuse me. And there was an interesting little development there on the sidelines that didn't get much pickup. Mr. Putin came to the SCO summit with a huge contingent of cabinet ministers and leaders of Russian business. And one of them was the head of Gazprom, and he was boasting about a new gas pipeline that is going to supply China with endless amounts of gas for eternity. And indeed, Mr. Putin reiterated this during his post-parade press conference. However, it seems that the Chinese foreign ministry politely pushed back on that, saying there's no agreement. So That's interesting. One final thought on this, and I think it's really, really important one to make, Kate, is that in all of this, it's very, very carefully scripted. There are no surprise outcomes. And one thing that was made very, very clear is who's Big Daddy here, and that is Xi Jinping without any doubt. Uh, I think that this was also a show of deterrence from China, more to regional neighbors rather than to faraway neighbors. But we were reminded as well who's the senior partner in the Beijing-Moscow relationship. It's definitely Beijing, and Xi Jinping is a very, very smart guy. We may not believe with his politics or his oppression, but he does know that for China to continue its growth, it needs a lot of energy resources. That is why his gaze is also looking over there to the Russian Far East, which is very, very lightly protected now because of the war in Ukraine, but where there are massive, massive resources. So keep an eye on that as it plays out in the years ahead.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the analysts I was reading who watched the parade said that one of the interesting things to look out for, or to think or to consider, is what President Putin and his generals would be thinking when they were sitting there
Yeah.
in that parade, knowing that they've depleted forces to the east of the country to the war in Ukraine, and knowing that they've been at war with China in the last century.
Yeah, and imagine what Donald Trump was thinking as he was sitting, perhaps watching this parade, compared to that so-called parade he had in Washington, D.C. for the anniversary of the U.S. military and somebody else's birthday as well. Let's not forget. So, yeah, but I mean, I noticed we saw a kind of probably deliberate emphasis on more robotics, on more drones, massive ones, ones that go underwater, ones that go in the air. But these were all stationary. We don't know if they were tested. I noticed even the robots that are meant to deliver ammunition and other things to the front lines were on trailers. But the Chinese are making advances in the high tech areas. But let's also remember too that there's one big component that they've yet to solve, and that is an endless provision of not only energy but also semiconductor chips. These are becoming so crucial in today's battles, right? Because they power a lot of these autonomous, pieces of military equipment, and it's actually Taiwan that has that expertise. China is way behind in that field, and also with the U.S. restricting supply of technology and chips to China, this is something that may hold them back.
And when people say that China is really you mentioned he's the big daddy, Xi Jinping. It's been said to me that if China wanted to, it could, and it stopped helping support Russia for its war in Ukraine. Russia simply could not continue. Why does it, do you think, not do that?
It's a really good question. Let me answer it this way, Kate, if I can. One of the things we strongly believe in, well, I and my circle of friends and analysts, is the main reason that Russian President Vladimir Putin has not used tactical nuclear weapons here in Ukraine is because China said, no way, that's a red line. So it shows you the kind of influence they have. But also, I think Xi Jinping doesn't want to necessarily see weak Russia or Russia fall, because that would also raise questions about his own viability, about other autocratic states as well that China helps support. But maybe we're taking things a little bit too far here, because there was also a conversation between Putin and Xi that was picked up by a Chinese hot mic saying that, hey man, it's possible now to live to 150 years old. There's things like organ transplants and things like this. So it certainly fits into the mindset of the autocrat that they can live forever and they can push things forever. But this points to the way the Chinese act, is that they always take the long range view, and they're always very, very strategic. It's a big chessboard for them, and they know exactly where things fall into the place. For example, the North Korean leader, I'm sure, was told that these are your red lines. If you cross them, we're going to cut you off. So everyone knows their place in this kind of ballet.
And to that point, why do you think Xi Jinping allowed Kim Jong-un to meet on a one-to-one with President Putin?
Well, these are kind of client states in the big chessboard game, and North Korea has been sending, as you know, heaps of ammunition to Russia, thousands of soldiers that a lot of them have died or have been captured, other things as well. And we're not quite clear what Russia is sending in return, but I'm pretty sure it has to do also with nuclear weapon technology, nuclear power technology, because the one thing Xi Jinping doesn't want is for North Korea to be a drag on him or his economy. So, let's allow the Russians to take up a bit of the slack, and also, by empowering the DPRK, it also sends it also sends a signal to the West, to Donald Trump, that they are a menace, and that they can be also deployed, perhaps in a future war, perhaps in a takeover of Taiwan, to help defend the cause, so to speak.
And it obviously didn't go unnoticed. Donald Trump saying that they were conspiring against him. Did they push his buttons, do you think, or was it the irony that it was interpreted as?
I think he probably watched it. He was probably noticing who's standing where, or who showed up and who didn't. But one thing he would have noticed is more criticism of the United States, and what they see as unfair trade practices. And also, there's a fear that Mr. Modi will be pushed more towards China's embrace after the US have been courting him forever and ever. But again, let's not take things too far. As I said, the Pakistani leader was there. We will remember that in the recent dust-up between India and Pakistan, it was the Chinese that helped provide intelligence, and I believe there was Chinese aircraft as well. So there are kind of regional tensions there that kind of make this show of unity a bit fuzzy too. Mr. Trump will do whatever he wants. He will do whatever he can to enrich himself, his family, and his friends, and he doesn't care about the cost to India or anybody else.
And how much do you think Donald Trump's chaotic foreign policy and the tariffs that you mentioned have actually pushed these powers, China, India, Russia, North Korea, closer together, irrespective of the limitations of their alliances?
Yeah, well, at least when it comes to China and North Korea, the phrase self-reliance is a very big one. I think they dream about it at night, both leaders. And, especially China, if it needs to buddy up with the thugs in Myanmar, so be it. And that will, because they need support too, for instance, to press ahead against their opponents in Myanmar. And in return, what does China get? Access to the north, where it can lay gas pipelines, exploit resources. So I think everything is very carefully planned out in terms of, what they're all of them. And Russia has limitations when it comes to this, but it does have vast availability of rare earth minerals. All of them are taking the long view that, the United States is heading into more of an isolationist approach. It may swing its tariff baton or sanctions baton as much as it wants, but through BRICS, through the SCO, and through other fora where they meet, they are planning for a future without reliance on the United States. And that's one thing I don't think it's gone through his thick head yet.
Just really interested to get your reaction to the pictures that emerged this week of a map behind the head of Russia's armed forces, General Gerasimov, which showed redrawn borders within Ukraine to include more areas that are supposed to be Russian, including not only the four oblasts it already claims, but it is also Mykolaiv and Odessa. That must have been a calculated move to show that map, do you think?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it doesn't surprise any of us. We all knew that they have designs. They would love nothing more than to make Ukraine a landlocked country. And by moving up to Mykolaiv, and don't forget at the start of the war, they were pretty darn close, and including Odessa, and then the stretch from here up to the Moldova border, perhaps even further, that would seal the deal, so to speak, for them. They have always had a fascination with where I'm sitting right now, with Odessa, and I think it is part of their plan. But it would come at a huge cost. I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail, but if you drive perhaps an hour in the direction of Mykolaiv from here, you will see a lot of fortifications that the Ukrainians have been building. There's also, the Ukrainian advantage that we saw quite early in the war on the Black Sea. These remote drones, but also mini submarines, capabilities to really inflict damage on Russia's Black Sea fleet. In fact, they've decapitated it in half, pretty much. So there are a lot of military challenges that Russia would have to overcome to reach this point. But let's also throw this into the mix, Kate, is that we're in September and later this month, parliamentary elections in Moldova. And I can tell you, it ain't looking good in terms of the ruling party led by Maya Sandu holding on to power there. There's a lot of Russian activity there underneath the surface and not so underneath the surface. And I mention this because if Russia doesn't advance militarily up to this point, it's certainly doing that through its hybrid war. Let's also remember that they have Transnistria there. So some very potentially turbulent weeks up ahead.
And how much concern is that causing in Ukraine?
I think the belief here is that let's reset the button. Let's take stock of where we are right now. Of course, there was a big meeting of the Coalition of the Willing that was supposed to happen this week in Paris, mostly by hybrid format, which tells you something. Leaders aren't showing up in person. But to a lot of Ukrainians here, it's a lot of blah, blah, blah coming out of European leaders. And, I think this is a wake-up call to them that they have to move even quicker than they already have. They have moved at breakneck speed to develop their own capabilities, especially in high-tech and drone technology. I can't even put it into words. There's massive disappointment here at the lack of capability or lack of unwillingness of European leaders to step up to the plate. Sure, they're going to say, yeah, we've given a lot to Ukraine in terms of military might and dollars, but look, even the UK, France, and Italy have said no way to putting troops on the ground. And those European countries that have committed troops to a post-war Ukraine has said, well, maybe on the border with Ukraine and Poland or as far as Western Ukraine, but that's about it.
And this lack of unity is being fully and roundly exploited by the Kremlin, isn't it? Basically, by repeating its demands or its red lines, so-called red lines, that it won't see any troops from NATO countries in Ukraine whatsoever. So nothing really changes, does it? And we're talking before the results of that virtual meeting in Paris has taken place. We're talking on Thursday morning, so we don't know exactly what's going to come out of it. But I'm just really interested to know, what do you think? I mean, given the fact that any talk of reassurance forces or troops on the ground or security guarantees at the moment is going nowhere because there isn't even a ceasefire in order to be able to put this into place. What message do you think can come out of it? Is perhaps the best thing a strong message or an influential message towards President Trump, do you think? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is a show to, we're talking about another daddy, aren't we? Mr. Trump is to say, okay, we know we still need you. We need your intelligence. We need you to provide Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. But we also want to show you that, yes, we are building up our own capabilities, as you have asked. We are kind of entering into a formation where if peace does come to Ukraine, we will be ready to be the guarantors, the kind of tripwire force, if you will, if everything falls into place. And they also believe that when peace does come to Ukraine, the U.S. part of that puzzle will be provide air cover and intelligence. I think a lot of this is something which is being done on a very technical level. We don't know all the details. Whether it's something that even reaches the short attention span of the U.S. president, I don't know. But look, this is all anybody needs to know, Kate, is that what happened in that circus in Alaska was very, very important because it showed us up close that Donald Trump was so eager not to only rehabilitate Mr. Putin from his pariah coffin, but also he seemed to have drunk some spiked Russian Kool-Aid where he parrots a lot of the Kremlin lines. Let's not forget how he decimated USAID. Ukraine was the biggest recipient of their aid since the start of the war. Voice of America, all of these other things that the Russians hate without lifting a finger. Mr. Putin not only got that diplomatic stage, and I gotta say, that whole show seemed as if it was scripted from beginning to end by the Kremlin. And that whatever happened to these punishing, tariffs that Mr. Trump promised on Russia if they don't, reach the peace table with Ukraine. So, can you blame the Ukrainians for being skeptical? No one should.
No, exactly. And I'm just wondering, to sort of end where we started and the constant bombardment of Ukraine and yourself, and the fact that I'm really saddened to hear that you don't go to Kyiv anymore and that you feel that you can't do that. I mean, daily life, what's it like?
Well, here in Odessa, life does go on, although there are deepening concerns about harsh military. I can't even call them recruitment tactics, but they're called the Titsaka, the kind of military police who go around and literally grab men off the streets, and if their documents aren't in order or if they're evading the draft, they're taken immediately and on very short notice sent to the front line. Hence, that's caused a lot of drop in business here. I have friends who own small businesses here, and they say business is way down because men just don't want to go out. They don't want to risk, being nabbed off the streets. And then, I think it was Alexander Vindman who said that this is a war being fought mostly on the shoulders of the middle class. And you go around Ukraine and you see that all of those elites who have, in one way or the other, legally or illegally, gained millions or billions of dollars are either abroad or living life to the max. Kate, it saddens me. I was, maybe 1 year into the war, sitting in one of Warsaw's more expensive restaurants. I was being treated, I didn't pay. But, I was overhearing a conversation by clearly a Ukrainian chap who bought a certificate showing he has a nonprofit, and that allows him to, go across the border into the EU. It allows him to send his kid to British schools. And, I mention this because I don't think it's just a small example, but it's emblematic of the bigger picture here is somehow those who have connections, those who have the means have either left or they bought their way out of the war. And that really, really gets under the skin of people here who have either lost somebody dear in the war or those who are preparing to go to battle. They might question whatever happened to that part of the puzzle that isn't present. So it kind of adds to also the concerns about corruption here, that war is not being fought to the max. So, but one last point, and this is really, really important to make, is that let that not put any idea into people's minds that people here are weak or they want to give up or they want to give concessions. There is not one person in Ukraine that has not lost a loved one or a close one in this war. Hence, the last thing they want to do is give up territory, because that would be seen as, why did these young men and women die for?
Michael Bociurkiw, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.